I have a Facebook. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
So what's your
Stephen Rogers, just like my name is on the screen.
All right, Steve, it's all you.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Morning.
Wonderful to be with you and all you ladies and somebody up here in the corner. I don't know who that guy is, but great to be with all of you. Let's jump right into class tonight because we want to try to finish what we're focused on. I gave you an assignment last week.
You did?
Anybody remember what it was?
Everybody knows what it is.
Yes. Talking about Immaculate Conception.
Most people would think that the Immaculate Conception referred to what?
Jesus Christ.
Really?
Yes. And what about Jesus Christ?
Well, I'll let somebody else talk because the perception would be that Immaculate Conception refers to the fact that Jesus Christ was conceived without the physical act of reproduction by a human.
And to a virgin.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Most people would think that Immaculate Conception refers to the virgin birth of Jesus. Is that true?
Not really, because actually for Catholic Church or the Catholic people, Immaculate Conception is the mother of Jesus. She was named Immaculate Conception because they said that she was conceived as a virgin, or she did not inherit the original sin, which is the sin from Adam and Eve. So she was conceived sinless, something like that.
Yeah, let me tell you how this happened. From the time of Augustine in the 5th century, those in the roots of Catholicism taught the concept of original sin. And by the way, I know you all see a lot of Catholicism there. You know what in Catholicism, what do they do to babies?
They baptize.
Yeah, they call it baptizing them when they pour a little water on them. And they do that supposedly to get rid of the original sin. What is fascinating is they taught that for 1,400 years. And no one ever made the connection. If every baby that's born in flesh has original sin, then they need to have something done to them immediately at birth, supposedly to remove the original sin. And they taught that all those years, and all of a sudden in the 1800s, there was a priest that came along and began to think about the implications of that. Watch this. If every person born in a human body has original sin, what did you just do to Jesus?
Has sin.
Jesus was born with original sin then. And so this priest all of a sudden says, oh, we have a problem. And so what happened, I believe it was 1855, one of the popes established a law in Catholicism called Immaculate Conception. Now, I want you to watch with me. I'm going to use my hands over here to kind of explain something. Here is where Jesus died. Well, let's see. I don't know. If I do this like this, which side is going to look like the past? if here's the present, is that going to be okay to go this way on the past for you all? Is that going to work okay?
Okay.
Okay, is that going to work all right, Ernest?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fine.
Here's what they claim happened. That God, because of knowing what Jesus was going to do on the cross, said, I have to get Jesus out of original sin. And so here's supposedly is what happened. Now, we know here's his death, here's his birth. How long did Jesus live on earth in that fleshly body?
33 years.
33 and a half years. Okay, so 33 years. Here's the interesting question nobody knows. And I'd love to just see what you all think, because it's so interesting to ask this question and see how people perceive this. How old do you think Mary was when she had Jesus?
13 or 14.
13 or
about right.
14?
It's about that.
I have no idea. Where do people come up with any idea? The scripture doesn't say.
Doesn't say.
I'm gonna use a number 17. Watch with me and you'll understand why. So here is Jesus dying. Here is where he is born. And the claim that this Pope espoused and Catholicism began to teach was that how Jesus got out of original sin is, we got the 33, let's go back 17 more, that's 50 years. The claim is that God the Father accepted 50 years before Jesus died on the cross what he was going to do 50 years later, and accepted the benefits of that back here, and said, because of what Jesus is going to do in dying on the cross, I'm going to accept that sacrifice to remove Mary from original sin, and therefore Mary will be born pure, and thus the Christ child can be born without original sin.
Mhm.
What a convoluted doctrine. I mean, think how absurd such an idea is in contrast to biblical truth. Has there ever been a baby born in original sin? Has any
No.
baby ever been born in original sin?
Somebody.
No.
No.
No. No baby's ever been born in original sin. But here's what's incredible. Instead of giving up, when this priest comes to this and says, oh, we got a problem. By the way, they did have a big problem. But instead of giving up the false doctrine, they simply just convoluted out of thin air another ridiculous doctrine to try to cover Jesus and get him out of original sin. So the Immaculate Conception does not refer to Jesus' conception or birth at all, but rather it refers to the conception of Mary. And all of it was done to try to get Jesus out of original sin. That's the purpose of it, okay? Now, any
Yes.
questions or thoughts?
So
I'm not
Mary
trying
was
to make you have any
free.
thoughts. It's just an interesting study. I didn't know that until I was studying with a
Yeah.
girl in Catholicism, and we were going to study about Jesus. And I said, I would like for you for next time, I would like for you to study the concept of Immaculate Conception. And she said, okay. And so I thought, well, I better go study it myself. And when I realized what it was, I was like, oh, where did that come from?
Well,
Okay.
Steve,
Yes.
like everything else, the more you study it, the more you learn. I was unaware that Catholic theology actually not only assigns a virgin birth to Jesus Christ, but they also assign one to Mary.
Well, that's interesting.
So there were two virgin births, apparently,
interesting.
according to Catholic theology.
I haven't seen that in their writings. I've read some of it, and I've talked like to this girl that I talked to, but that's interesting. That's interesting. Of course, you all understand that in Catholicism, they not only believe in God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
They also believe that Mary's divine
Last Mary.
and claim that she is the female member of the Godhead, which there's no validity to that biblically at all. In fact, instead of there being validity to it, there are passages like 1 John 5:7. There are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. Okay. All right, I gave you one more assignment that I want to mention about. Right at the end of class last week, we talked about the concept of singing in the church in the New Testament. And I read to you Psalm 150. What did David, by inspiration in Psalm 150, say to Israel was God's will for music in worship at the temple and the synagogue under the law of Moses? What did we read last week? Anybody remember? We read Psalm 150, I think verses 3 to 5 was what we read.
Somebody
Yes.
grab it.
Okay.
Okay, go, Katrina.
Psalm 150, verse 3. Praise him with the sounding of the trumpet. Praise him with the harp and lyre. 4. Praise him with the timbrel and dancing.
Oh,
Praise him with the strings and pipe. Praise him with the clash of cymbals. Praise him with resounding cymbals.
Okay, I talked with you weeks ago about God in his authority speaking to people and giving them expectation. What expectation did God have of the Jews for music and worship? Mary Faye?
praise.
Sing instruments, praising instruments.
Yes. He commanded all kinds of instruments. In essence, it would be almost like an orchestra today. He also commanded singing back there. Now, there was one other verse I wanted to show you tonight. So turn with me to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 25. And this is where Hezekiah is the king of Judah. And I want you to notice as he began to reinstitute worship at the temple, what he did. Christine, if you'll read 2 Chronicles 29:25, please.
2 Chronicles 29:25. He stationed the Levites in the temple of the Lord with cymbals, sharp, and lyres, in the way prescribed by David, and Gad, the king's seers, and Nathan the prophet. This was commanded by the Lord through his prophets.
Okay, a question. Did God just tolerate the Jews using instruments of music and worship in the Old Testament? Or did God command the Jews to use instrumental music in worship?
God commanded.
He commanded it. And watch it. He commanded it through David, who was an inspired writer. He commanded
The
it through
prophet.
Gad, the king's prophet, and through Nathan the prophet. And notice the end of the statement, for thus was the commandment of the Lord by the prophets. I hear people say today, well, God just tolerated in the Old Testament, he just allowed the Jews to use instrumental music, but it never was his will. That is not true. In the Old Testament, God commanded it. So here's the point. When God wanted instrumental music, what did he do?
He commanded
He
that to
commanded.
use it.
Then you come to the New Testament, and what did he command?
Sing.
Sing from the hearts.
Yes, he commanded singing. Watch this in the Old Testament. use instruments and sing. You come to the New Testament, you sing and you make melody in your heart to the Lord. Ernest, you had a comment?
I did. The Greek on that sing and make melody in your heart is actually psalto, to play your heart. The instrument that we are commanded to play in the New Testament, according to Koine Greek, is your heart.
Yes, that we're to do so in our heart. And it is not that we do so on some instrument of music.
Correct. If,
By the way, any
if
of
God
you
had
play
wanted us to play drums or guitar or piano, it would have said salto piano. Instead, the Greek says salto, your heart.
do any of you play instruments of music? Any of you play a cello or a piccolo or a guitar or anything?
Cora does.
Cora, what do you play?
Long time ago, piano.
Me too. A long time ago. But you know what? We have talents to do that. But we don't bring something into worship because we have talent to do it or because we like it. The question is, what did Christ authorize in the New Testament? And so we have to be very careful. Now, a lot of people will say, well, God allowed it in the Old Testament. That doesn't prove anything because the Old Testament law was nailed to the cross. Some people will say, well, it was in heaven. The statement in Revelation is there were sounds like harps, etc. in heaven. It doesn't say there were harps, but it's very figurative language. So I just want all of you to be aware of these two things that we talked about. Now let's jump tonight back to authority and finish up that study tonight. We were talking last week about when some people don't understand and they misuse authority. So tonight we're going to look at about three other things about that. One of them is that people can have an improper view of expediency. By the way, when you use the word expedient, there are two different concepts of it. And it's important that you all get this in your mind. It's important you may write it down so that you are able to go back and look at it and say, okay, I get it. One concept of expediency is something that's helpful, something that's beneficial, something that's advantageous, okay? The second concept of expediency is God gives a law and says, here's what I want you to do. And the question is, how do we carry out that command, deciding the best way to do so? What's the most expedient way to do that? Now, let's jump back to the first definition. What about the idea of something being helpful or beneficial or advantageous? Rio, would you read John 18, verse 14, please? Everybody turn. Here is where Caiaphas made a decision about Jesus and what the Sanhedrin was going to do with Jesus. And let's talk about why he said this is expedient. John 18:14, Rio.
John 18:14. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people.
Now, Rio, do you remember what's going on here? This is in the time when Jesus is being tried he'd been tried by Annas, the high priest emeritus, who was Caiaphas' father-in-law, and now he's going to be tried by Caiaphas. What does it mean that it was expedient for one man to die for the people?
It will be the one to suffer for our sins.
Well, this is not talking about him dying on the cross.
No.
What is Caiaphas thinking when he says it's expedient to let him die instead of all the people?
It is more
Come on, somebody.
Katrina, what'd you say?
it is more beneficial to let one person die rather than having many, or
You're right on. Rather than having the whole Jewish nation to die or to be destroyed. Here was the idea. because of the confusion that's going on, and Rome is in control of Palestine at that time. That's why you had Pilate there. The Romans saw the Jews as insurrectionists, and they didn't like to tolerate all the confusion going on. And so the idea here is that Caiaphas says, hey, it's expedient. What does that mean? Well, it's beneficial. It's advantageous to let this guy die instead of all of us getting killed. Now, had nothing to do with Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. All he's saying is, let this guy die instead of all of us dying, okay?
Yes.
So there's an example of expediency. Let me give you another one. Turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 12. I think this is going to be one. Mayor Faye, please. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 12.
First Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. All things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything.
That word helpful, Mayor Faye, there in the text is in other translations translated by the word expedient. Paul is saying there's a lot of things that might be lawful for me. They're within the confines of God's law, God's will, but they might not be the best thing for me. So they may not be beneficial or advantageous. It might be okay for me to do it. Okay, let me give you an example. It might be okay for you to eat a whole pie for lunch every day. It might also not be advantageous or helpful to you. It might make you sick. It might give you diabetes. So there are things that might be lawful, but they might not be beneficial. Now, Sister Doe, turn to 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23, and Paul says almost the identical same thing here. By the way, in the context of 1 Corinthians, Paul is talking about some things about eating different foods that had been offered to idols in the city of Corinth, and it was just food. But some of the Corinthians got the idea if they ate meat that had been offered to an idol, that meant that they were being associated with the idol or considered by God as idolaters. Okay? So, Sister Doe, 1 Corinthians 10 and 23, please.
Okay. 1 Corinthians 10:23. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not.
Okay, so here's Paul's point. He says, there may be some things that that may be lawful. They may be okay for me to do, but the question is, are they something that is best for me? Are they something that might be addictive to me and therefore be hurtful or harmful to me? And are they going to benefit and be beneficial to other people? Paul says those are concerns that we need to keep in mind when we think about the idea of something being helpful or advantageous. Now, for example, there might be well, let me jump aside from that. Let's talk about the other concept, expedient, of carrying out a command. When God gives a command, the question is, what fits under that command? We're carrying out the command. So, for example, God says we're to worship on the first day of the week. We all know that.
Yes.
What are expedients under that? What are decisions that we can make that fit under, or they're a slave to that command? We're still doing the command, even though we make some decisions about how to carry out that command. So God says worship on the first day of the week. What are some decisions that congregations have to make as they fulfill this command to worship on the first day of the week? All right, let me give you an example. I'll get you started. Does the Bible say we have to have a building to worship in?
No.
No. We could worship out under a tree. Now, if a typhoon's coming, worshiping under a tree would probably be not a very good thing. Okay, you might get blown away. So we could say, okay, we could find a building. If we have a building and we're worshiping in that building, are we still obeying what the command is?
Yes.
Sure. What the decision we're making is a slave to the command. Okay. What are other things, decisions that we could make that would still be a slave to that command? Don't make this hard. For example, what about having lights? Do we have to have electricity where we worship?
Yeah, we do.
No.
Yes, we just lost our power for a few minutes.
Well, you all just dropped off the earth.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have to have electricity and lights where we worship, but hey, it's very helpful, right?
Yes.
It helps us to be able to see, to read, to see songbooks, etc. And so the idea of having electricity and having lights, if we have that, are we still obeying what God says about worship? There's the
Yes.
command. Are we still doing it?
Yes.
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 So an
Yes.
expedient are things that we do that are slaves to that command, but we're still obeying the command. Okay. Now, another example. In God giving the Great Commission, he said, go. I use this under specific and general commands. But when God said go, you know, we could ride a car, we could ride a bus, we could ride a train, we could ride a boat, we could fly. If I'm coming to the Philippines, I think I'd like to fly. Okay. But you know, on the other hand, if I'm in the United States and I'm going to go 3 or 4 hours away from where I am, it might be expedient for me to drive instead of fly. Why? Well, sometimes to fly, it takes time to get to the airport. You got to sit there a long time. You fly where you're going, and then you got to get off and all that stuff. Sometimes I probably could be where I'm going quicker by driving than I could by flying.
Yes.
Also, if I fly, I'm probably going to have to rent a car, and it's going to cost extra. So you look at those things and you say, okay, which way is the most convenient, the most expeditious way to do this? I'm still going. Okay, I'm obeying the command, but I'm making a decision. What's the best way for me to do that? Y'all with me?
Yes.
Yes.
Does that make sense? All right, now watch this. Let's talk about the Lord's Supper. When you come to the Lord's Supper, God has told us to take what two things?
Unleavened bread and fruit of the vine.
Yeah, he told us to take unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. How big a piece of bread do we take?
Doesn't say.
Doesn't say. How big are the cups?
Doesn't say.
Doesn't say. I know some people who in the United States who years ago split congregations saying you have to take communion, you have to take the fruit of the vine out of one cup. Could a congregation, matter of fact, you're smiling. Why would you smile at that?
And because of people have to drink one cup.
Yeah. You know, I have jokingly said to people, I wouldn't mind going to a church like that and being with them as long as I could sit on the front seat and take it first. I don't want to drink everybody's slobbers. You know, I don't want people giving me COVID. I don't want somebody giving me AIDS. By the way, you know what's interesting is when the AIDS epidemic came along, a number of those congregations stopped doing it.
Huh?
which said to me, if you really had conviction about it and said you have to do it this way, you'd keep on doing it no matter what. So a congregation is not sinning if they say, take it from one cup, but listen, is it expedient that we have individual cups and everybody take a cup for themselves? Is that, are we still obeying the command to
Yes.
take communion?
Yes.
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 By the way, is it wise to do it that way?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because we're protecting each other from some things that could be communicable. And, you know, what's the world seen this past year when you talk about things like COVID? Now, here's another one. What time do you all worship on Sunday?
10
10 o'clock.
10 a.m.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock? Do any of you work on Saturday night?
Yep.
Times, yeah.
Yes,
What time do you get off on Sunday morning?
7 or 6 a.m.
6 a.m.? Okay. Now I want to ask you a question. Could the leaders of a congregation say, we're going to meet on Sunday morning at 5 a.m.? God gave us a
They can do
command
that.
to worship on the first day of the week, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, could the leaders of a congregation say, in our congregation, we're going to worship at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning?
They can.
Yes.
They could do that. Let me ask you a question. With all of you and many of you working on Saturday night, is that an expedient decision?
No.
No.
No,
there's
it's a
not.
dumb decision, okay? It's a disrespectful decision because it's not considering the members and their lives, okay? And so when we think about expedience, one side is simply something that's helpful or advantageous, but the other side is looking at God's command and saying, here's what the Lord commanded. Now let's talk about, is something an expedient or not? The Lord said in communion, we're to take what two elements?
And
Unleavened bread
the vine.
and fruit of the vine.
Fruit of the vine.
By the way, the word oinos, wine, is never used in connection with the Lord's Supper. I hear people talk about unleavened bread and wine. The Bible never uses that word in the Greek text. But watch this. What if somebody says, well, you know, there's a whole lot more loaves of bread around than there is unleavened bread. And so, you know, and people can take a bigger piece. And so we're just going to go and get a loaf of bread at the grocery store. And we're going to use that for communion. Is that decision an expedient? Is that obeying the command that the Lord gave? Yes or no?
No.
No.
No, because the Lord gave the command, unleavened bread.
Yes.
Okay, so in that decision, somebody has stepped out of the command, being a slave to the command, the expedient of I'm still obeying the command. They've stepped outside that and said, we're going to do it the way we like. That's a problem because they're disobeying God. Okay, now any questions about what we've talked about so far?
I would like to add something.
Yes, Katrina.
Wondering why our time is like this. Our Bible studies time is like this. Because it is expedient or more beneficial because some of us went out from work 10 a.m. or rather, that is why we decided to have this time. So after
talking
our
about
work,
this?
so we can attend.
This day.
You're talking about the time we're doing this one right now, Katrina?
Yes.
Yes.
That is correct.
Absolutely. By the way, you know what? In the United States, most congregations have their midweek service on Wednesday night.
Yes.
You all have yours on Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
When I was in the former Soviet Union, they had theirs on Monday. Now, question, did the Lord command us to have a midweek Bible study?
No.
No. Well, why do we do it? Why
It
do
was
we do it?
commanded
Go ahead, Cora.
that we have to get together.
He
So we are-
commanded us to, Cora, I thought Cora was going to say something.
No. Go ahead.
Okay. Where are we violating the authority of God to have a class on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock?
No.
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 No. Why not? Because God told us to study the word, right?
Yeah.
What are we doing? We're studying the word. Okay. We can do that anytime, but we can't take communion this morning. Why? Because the exemplification is, by the way, we have a command, or we have the expectation the Lord gave for us to take it. We have the exemplification of it in the first century when the Christians took it on the first day of the week. They took it on the Lord's Day to honor Jesus and his death, burial, and resurrection. And so what we understand then is, like the time that you all have class, you do it what's expedient, what's most advantageous, and most everybody can be there. In the United States, for example, it's an interesting thing why on Sundays in the United States, people have Bible classes and worship on Sunday morning about 10 o'clock, and then at night they have worship about 6 o'clock. What the underlying reason for that is that 150 years ago in the United States, most people were farmers. Guess what farmers did early in the morning?
Farm.
They went to the farm.
He milked cows.
Mhm.
Guess what they did in the evening? They milked cows. And so worship times were set around the idea of people being in farming and having to milk in the morning and milk in the evening. And that's the reason that in the United States, that's kind of the historical precept that's behind the decision to have worship like is done here. By the way, it wouldn't make a bit of difference if it was done at 6 o'clock in the morning and you had a Bible class, or you had a sermon and then you had a Bible class and then you had another sermon. It would be the same amount of time. You just did it at different hours. It doesn't matter. God never told us what hour to do it on the first day of the week. He told us to worship together on the first day of the week. Amen.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Another thing about expedience is that people oftentimes step outside this phrase I'm using, that an expedient has to be a slave to the command. It's obeying the command. Many people will say, well, you can step outside that and it's okay. For example, it might be that somebody comes along and says, well, I love instrumental music. Most of my friends in their churches have instrumental music. And so I want to bring instrumental music into the worship service at the Selene Church of Christ. What about that?
Ain't gonna happen.
Rio said no. Why no?
It's not commanded.
Is it because we're just trying to be weird? No.
No.
Is it
It's not
because
commanded.
we want to be different than everybody else? No.
No, we're just obeying.
And here's what some people will say. They'll say, well, it's just an expedient to help me to be able to sing better. Well, here's the question. If I am playing a piano, drums, guitar, whatever, is that a slave to the command in the New Testament to sing and make melody in your heart?
No.
No, I've stepped outside that command and said, I'm going to do it my way. Okay. Let me give you a parallel example. What if somebody said, well, you know, unleavened bread just is kind of blah. You know, it's kind of hard to swallow. How about if I just put some peanut butter and jelly on it?
It's good. Jelly. No, it's not going to work.
Now, they may use that argument and say, well, it's easier for me to swallow. But the problem is when they put peanut butter or jam or jelly on top of the unleavened bread, what have they just done to the command?
Just step out.
Added to.
They've just stepped outside the command. Now their decision is not a slave to the command to take unleavened bread. They've said, we're going to do it our way. Stop it, Ernest. I don't want to see your fingers. Now, one other thing I want to talk to you about Yes, you have the word expedience, but I want to talk to you about the word indifference. And what I mean by that, there are some things that you and I can do, and God has never spoken about it. For example, Katrina and Christine, they say, I like drapes that are pink and white. Mary Faye says, I like mine that are kind of orange and white. And Cora says, I like mine to be white. Question. Are any of the three of them doing anything wrong in making those decisions?
No.
No. Has God ever spoken about what kind of drapes we use?
No.
No. It's totally indifferent. You know, God never spoke about a lot of things. And so, for example, the kind of food we eat. What's your favorite food?
Seafood.
All of you, speak up. Mary Faye, what's your
Seafood.
favorite food? What is it? Did you say cheese?
Any kinds of
Seafood.
seafood.
Any kind of seafood. And you know what? There are other Christians that say,
Well,
I like seafood too.
Steve, I happen to know Annalisa's allergic to some seafood, right, Annalisa?
Yeah, you have some people, especially some things like shellfish and so forth. You know, it may be crabs or lobsters or whatever, shrimp. A lot of people are allergic to the iodine in them. And so, you know, here's the point, guys. God never said the kind of food we eat. Some people might like rice. Some people might like chicken. Some people might like pork. Some people might like Mary Faye, might like fish and seafood. Some people might like pizza. Some people might eat alligator. By the way, I've had some. Some people might like to eat snake. Okay, you know, is anybody sinning by eating any of those foods? Yes or no?
No.
No. God never told us that we have to be concerned about eating a certain kind of food. Cora?
Since we're talking about getting out of the commandment or what's beneficial, we attended a church back in Florida. In the communion, they have one big loaf of bread, and one big cup of fruit of the vine, and pass it to everybody.
Sharing.
I mentioned a while ago, Cora, about the idea. Can a congregation use one cup? Yeah, it's not smart. And by the way, a lot of them have given that up since AIDS and COVID have come along. But the question of one big loaf, the question is then, is it unleavened bread? Because, you know, again, you can step right outside the command. Because what does leaven mean? What does unleavened mean?
It refers to yeast.
Yeah. What does yeast make bread do?
Rise.
Rice.
Yeah, absolutely. So unleavened bread doesn't have yeast in it. And so if you have a bread that has that, then you can. All right, let me jump quickly to two other things. We talked earlier about general and specific commands. Let me simply remind you that God has given specific commands. He's given general commands. An erroneous decision would be to demand specific authority when God gave general authority. For example, God said, worship on the first day of the week. If somebody stands up and says, you have to worship at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. No, you don't. They're making a law that is not, it doesn't obey God's command, worship on the first day of the week. If they say you have to do it at one specific hour, they've made their own rule over here, okay? For example, God says, teach the word. He didn't tell us where, he didn't tell us how. He's given us the decision to make in that. And if somebody comes along and says, well, you have to do it this way and you can't do it any other way, well, that's when they're demanding specific authority where God never gave it. On the flip side, people can generalize when God has specified. And for example, the question of music and worship, God is specified. But a lot of people want to generalize and say, well, as long as you make music, that's all that matters. No, God has given the specific command. Now, the last thing I want to mention today is simply this, that we need to be careful about our attitude. And an erroneous concept that people have about attitude is that some will come along and say, well, New Testament authority is no longer binding. You'll hear people say like this, well, the laws given in the New Testament, that was 2,000 years ago. Times have changed. We're in a different culture. We're not bound by first century patterns. Well, guys, there's a problem with that statement, because Jesus said that his command was given and it was going to last till the end of the age in Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20. And we're told by Peter that God in this last dispensation, and in the book of Hebrews as well, in this last dispensation, God's spoken by his Son. And there's the authority that we have for everything. Another thing about attitude is that some people have the mindset that a church officials or official documents of the church are as authoritative as the Bible. People will say, well, here's the Bible, but what our church leaders say or what our writings say about our church, those are just as authoritative as the Bible. I have met lots of people who have creed books. I have talked with people in Catholicism who will say there is a triune authoritative state in the Catholic Church, and they will say, here's what you have. You have the Bible, you have tradition, and what they mean by that is supposedly that God has spoken by the Holy Spirit to leaders all through the ages of the Catholic Church, and then the magisterium, which is the present leaders. And they will say these last two are just as authoritative or more authoritative than the Bible. Well, folks, that's an erroneous attitude about biblical authority, because the Bible is the authority and the standard, okay? And what you see people do is they begin to elevate their own doctrines because they want people to follow their doctrines instead of the Bible. And then let me just mention one other thing about that, and that is in congregations, and you all aren't at that point there yet, but in congregations, God wants them to get to the point that men are qualified to be elders in local congregations. Now, I want Cora, if you would turn to Hebrews 13:17. We'll stop here tonight at that passage, but turn to Hebrews 13:17 and look what Paul says to Christians in congregations when there are elders. Do we have an obligation to submit to them in their teaching? By the way, here's something I want to ask you. Do elders in a congregation have authority to make spiritual laws? Yes or no? No.
Oh, people.
No.
They don't have any authority to make law. Christ has already given the law, right?
Yes.
Watch this. Elders make decisions about expedient things. For example, what time are we going to worship on the first day of the week? Okay. Now, what's Paul's advice to members of congregations with their leadership? Cora, verse 17, please.
Hebrews 13:17. Have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. Do this so that their work will be a joy, not a burden, for that would be of no benefits to you.
So he says, obey those that have the rule over you and submit yourself. So the advice that Paul gives these Hebrew Christians is, look, members of congregations need to be submissive to the leaders in the congregation. Now, let me say something. Leaders in congregations need to be wise enough. For example, decisions that you all make about what time are we going to worship on the first day of the week. It would be absolutely absurd to have leaders of the congregation like at Salong to say, we're going to worship at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning. If those men respected the congregation and your all's work situations, they're not going to make a decision like that. They're going to be respectful of the members. On the flip side, if what the decisions they make and they're trying to be respectful, then you submit to those decisions, and decisions they make in expedient matters. We try to be submissive to that to make their job easy. But let me take you back to one last point, guys. All of this is about you and me having the proper attitude toward authority spiritually, and that is we love Christ. He has all authority, Matthew 28:18. The apostles and prophets gave us the New Testament scriptures, and there's our authoritative document to follow. And God help all of us in our minds and our lives to say, you know what? My determination is to be loyal to Jesus and to the revealed words been given. You all will have situations in your life where some people will stand up and they will promote some things, and it may cause you to have questions or doubts. But always ask, is this being submissive to Jesus? Are we obeying the Lord's expectations? Are we following the New Testament? And don't let people lead you astray from that authority we've been given in the Bible, okay? Any questions?
I have a question. Is the you use this pastor they have a church covenant, and they have to sign their name, so that what the pastor had told to the members, that this is the thing that you should do, so to make it sure that the members will obey the policy or the covenant of the church, they have to sign up. So all the members signed it up, so that because they respect the pastor. So I think it is not a biblical.
I've never seen that, Sister Doe.
Ate Doe, I think probably they're just making those things. It's just and asking for their numbers. Probably it's just for them to how do you call it? I forgot the term. You have to. I mean, I forgot the term.
Pledge? No,
Are you
What?
talking about for example, in giving?
a pledge?
No,
No.
No,
no,
it's not
understand.
that.
Shh, give me a minute. Let me weigh in because I'm familiar with the situation to which
That's
Joe
why
was referencing.
I was hoping you would address that, Ernest.
What they have is a church not too far from where we are located, a denominational church.
Right.
Number one,
That's what I suspected.
pastor does not refer to the evangelist. It refers to the elder. Okay.
Yes. In the New Testament, the word never refers to a preacher unless he is qualified to be
Correct.
an elder, like Peter in 1 Peter 5. He was an apostle, he was a preacher, and he was also an elder in the church.
Correct. The covenant you have with Jesus Christ is not to be superseded by any covenant you have with someone else, and they are not allowed to either add to or take away from the commands of Jesus Christ and the apostles and the apostolic examples. This is not what you're referring to, Sister Doe, is not within, because understanding, it's not a giving pledge, Steve. In this particular case, the leader of the congregation, single man leadership rather than a plurality of elders, which would be scriptural.
Which is in denominational churches all over the place.
Right. Makes you sign an agreement, including where you can and cannot attend church, how often you have to be there. It's a broad, sweeping agreement that he has imposed upon this group of people.
Yeah. And let me say this, in some of the churches of Christ, started out in Gainesville, Florida, ultimately spread across the United States and ultimately in the world. There were some congregations that were called the Crossroads Churches of Christ, and then they later were called the Boston Movement.
Yes.
And for example, are any of you young ladies not married? How many of you are not married? Okay, Christina and Katrina. Let me tell you what they would do. They would, with their members, they would tell young ladies who they could date. And when people, they did a concept of baptism that was not just people being baptized in order to be saved, but rather they called it lordship baptism. And in reality, what these people were doing, it was almost cultish, because the leaders were saying, okay, girls, we're going to tell you who you can date and when you can date. And when people were baptized, they would say, we're going to tell you, you can't go back and see your parents. Listen, I have no right as a minister of the gospel to tell people who they are going to marry. Now, I can give them some wise advice if I think they're making a mistake. You know, for example, if a young lady's dating an alcoholic, I would probably say to her, look, you need to stop and think what you're doing here. This has some terrible ramifications. But for me to come and say, you can't date somebody that you choose, I'm going to pick your mate for you. I don't have a right to do that as a minister. And so you need to be very careful that you don't submit to a man about laws that he makes spiritually and says you got to follow these when they're not under the authority of Christ. Just be careful.
Did we get your question answered, Doe?
Yeah.
I do have some. I don't have this one question.
Come on, Annalisa.
It's like you said about baptism. It's like you have to drown the person in the water, right? It should be like that.
Actually, the word, and I'll answer for you, Steve, if that's okay. The word baptism is a transliteration from Greek. If you took baptizo, which is the Greek word that is used in the New Testament, and translated it, it translates as to immerse.
Yes.
If you transliterate it, you can call it sprinkling if you want to, but it doesn't fulfill what was actually written in the Greek.
Yeah, let me answer that a little bit more. Annalisa, in the Greek language,
Okay.
in the Greek language, there are three different words. There is one word that is rantidzo. There is a second word that is kio. There's a third word that is baptizo. The word rantizo, if you transliterate it, you put the equivalent letters from English from Greek into English, it's rantize. If I said to you it's rantizing outside, you all would look at me and say, what's he talking about? I never heard that word. Well, no, because it's not an English word. If I said to you it's keying outside, immediately you probably think about keys to your house or your car. But the word rantize means sprinkle. The word kio means to pour. But the word baptizo inherently means to submerge, to cover up, to totally bury.
Immerse.
And so what you have is religions have come along and they have equated pouring a little cup of water or sprinkling a little water on somebody, and many of them will call that baptism. Let me say this to you. In the biblical perspective, that is not baptism. That is people who stepped outside the authority of God. When God's authoritative command is to baptize, they've stepped out from under that. Sprinkling and pouring is not a slave to the command to be baptized.
So I want to say something like those Bedouins people in they are living in the desert, and then they cannot go away. For example, like in Israel, there are some Bedouins, and they cannot go out in that desert because they are not allowed to go inside Israel. I mean, it's already in Israel, but they are separated from the people. So in that area, it's just desert. There's no water at all, and just like even water to drink is just so difficult for them to find. And when you go there, you preach gospel to these Bedouins, and they accept Jesus and they want to be baptized, then what are you gonna do? They are not allowed to go inside.
Annalisa, let me say this to you. There are two arguments that people give about trying to say, well, people can't be baptized. One of them is, well, what if you're in a place that's in a desert and there's no water? Number two, what if somebody is on the moon or somewhere and there's no water? Let me say something to you. The reality is that people can't live without water.
No,
If
there's
anybody's
water, It's just so
If-
the water is just so difficult. It's in the
Well, let me say
desert.
this. I've been in Israel. I've been in Israel, Annalisa, and
Have you been to where Bedouins live?
I've been in desert places over there, okay? These people live around places where you have water. You've got to have it. And the reality is, to baptize somebody, you don't have to have 6 feet of water deep to baptize people. I've baptized people in portable baptistries, Ernest, that we've carried to the former Soviet Union, that are smaller than a bathtub, and you can immerse people. So sometimes people are trying to find an excuse to say, well, people, they can't obey God. The reality is, what I find so incredible is God asked us to be immersed. God asked us to be immersed in an element that covers 66% of this ball we live on.
Yes.
And you look where cities are established, they're always established around water sources. Why? Because man has to have water to survive. Animals have to have water to survive. And so it really becomes a person might be in a desert situation for a while, but they're going to have to get to where there's water, because they're not going to live if they don't. And so God has asked us to be immersed in something that is very, very available to us wherever we are. And that'd be my answer to that.
That's it. Yes.
Any other questions?
Oh
Because
yeah,
God-
there's
ah,
things also. There is I don't wanted to say, yeah, it's biblical. It just said that Sir Ernest said that Jesus said that you have to worship God in your heart. I play instrument in your heart. What did you say, sir? I just forgot. Something like
Sing
that.
and
And
make
then
music. The English translation is to sing and make music in your heart. However, what it actually says is salto your heart. You are to play the musical instrument that is the human heart. If
the thing is, you said that singing with instrument inside the church is not biblical, and it's like I just in Old Testament. I mean, people they're singing and they're even playing, they're dancing, and God's glorify it, and it's like and probably in this generation, it's like people cannot just can go up in the altar and sing without those music, but their heart is far away from God. So probably I think it's just the thing God says that you have to sing with I mean from your heart. Is like either you are singing with playing something, as long as your heart is really set in the Lord, something like that. Oh, I
Well,
forgot what I
Annalisa, let me say this to you. Obviously, people have to have their heart into the worship. In the Old Testament, when God wanted Jews to have instruments and music, he told them to use instruments and to sing and to put their hearts into it, okay? In the New Testament, when you come to the church, God told the church to sing and to put their hearts into the worship. If God had wanted instruments, he would have authorized that. He would have commanded it, because when he wanted it, he commanded in the Old Testament. It's just like, for example, in the New Testament with the communion, he commanded unleavened bread and fruit of the vine. If he had wanted watermelon, or if he had wanted pineapple, he would have said so. But he gave us his directions of what to do. And the question we always have to ask is, am I obeying the command? I understand that many people love to get excited when they have instrumental music. But the reality is, I want you all to stop and think about it. I mentioned about water, and God, I think God's so smart. He asks us to be immersed in water in order to be forgiven of our sins, and it covers 2/3 of the ball we live on. He's asked us to worship him in spirit and in truth. You know what's interesting? I can worship God here in Evansville. You all can worship God in Ceylon. But you know what else? I can be on a trip, and I can be where there are no Christians, and I can still worship God. You know why? Because the 5 things he's told us to do in worship. for us to study the Word, for us to pray
Right.
together, for us to
Give.
take communion, for us to study the Word, and for us to give and so forth. And to sing. Every one of those things I can do no matter where I am in the world. And you know, to take unleavened bread and fruit of the vine, I've taken that with me when I've traveled and I didn't know where I was going to find it. I just took it with me. And you know what? I don't have to have any instrument with me to be able to worship God acceptably because I've got the one God told us to use in the New Testament. We sing with our voice and we praise God from our heart. And so the beauty of New Testament worship is I don't have to take any of those things with me. Okay, guys, great to be with you. And Ernest, thank you for the opportunity. Ladies, love your all's hearts. Encourage you to continue to study. This thing that we're studying about biblical authority is a huge, huge topic. And it's one that so many people don't grasp well. So it's important that you all ponder this, think about it, make sure you get it. And God bless all of you. It's been my pleasure to be with you.
The
Thank
pleasure is
you.
ours.
Thank you.